I'm Kiara Mackenzie. One evening when I was 37, just as Tam Callahan's laughter had yet to fade from the restaurant's warm air, every single tightly wound string inside me snapped all at once. That day, we were sitting by the window at Toscano Winery. The fettuccine in front of me had only been touched twice. He'd just picked up a forkful of pasta and casually mimicked the way I'd presented my work report last week. As soon as my fingers began to tremble while holding my glass of red wine, it wasn't a dramatic breakup, not a fight, not tears, but rather a slow, crystal-clear moment of realization, a thread he'd been pulling and tugging at for so long, worn thin and frayed, finally snapping completely at the very moment it should have held strongest. This was Tam's favorite Italian restaurant. Every month, we'd gather here with his old college buddies, for couples, faces familiar, conversations predictably unremarkable. That evening, Tam was in high spirits, speaking loudly and gesturing wildly with his wine glass, interrupting others mid-sentence, and doing his utmost to be the center of attention. I'd long grown accustomed to this side of him, just as he needed an audience the way others needed air. The turning point came in a moment that should have been entirely harmless. Someone asked me about my new project at work, and before I could even reply, Tam leaned back in his chair, pouted slightly, and pointed at me with his fork. "Kiara really needs to change her personality," he announced loudly. "The way she is now is basically useless, like an old sofa that should have been thrown away ages ago." The table fell instantly silent. The wife of one of his friends lowered her head, staring at her plate. Someone tried to chuckle but stopped short mid-laugh, and even the waiter froze halfway through pouring wine, holding the bottle aloft. I felt a searing heat, a heat that didn't burn the skin but seemed to pierce right through my ribs, the kind of sensation built up from countless suppressed humiliations. Yet Tam kept going. "Come on, she knows I'm just joking. She's like a piece of furniture, expensive, sure, but utterly useless." He laughed at his own words, but no one else joined in. That silence was even more suffocating than the insult itself. I glanced around the dinner table and suddenly, painfully, realized something simple. This wasn't the first time. Not nearly the first time, in fact. For months now, he'd been making fun of me in public like this, always pretending it was just a joke. Every time I confronted him about it afterward, he'd brush it off with casual indifference. But this was the first time that everyone present had finally noticed the awkwardness. They weren't laughing, and they weren't looking at either of us. Tam was waiting for me to play my usual role, smile, shrug my shoulders, and pretend I didn't care at all. I'd long since trained myself to be tolerant, patient, and understanding. I told myself that he was just under too much pressure, that maybe I was being overly serious, or perhaps it was just his clumsy sense of humor. But in that eerie moment, when time seemed to stand still, I suddenly realized something with crystal-clear clarity, so vividly that even I felt a bit frightened. I no longer wanted to put on any more masks. I placed the napkin on the table, pushed back my chair, and stood up. "Tam," I said, my voice calm yet firm, "you're single now." The reaction was immediate. Someone gasped sharply, and a man muttered softly, "Oh my God." Tam blinked, looking utterly confused, as if he hadn't understood a word I'd said. "Kiara, wait, whoa, what are you talking about?" "Just kidding," he said, half smiling and half flustered. But his confusion only underscored one thing. He was deeply convinced that no matter what he did to me, I'd never leave him. I didn't argue. I didn't offer any explanations, and I didn't give him the chance to drag me into yet another argument, one in which he'd portray himself as the victim while painting me as the unreasonable one. I simply walked straight past the bar, past the hostess desk, and out the restaurant door. I heard him calling my name behind me, his shoes scuffing against the floor as he hurried after me, but I didn't turn around. The night air in Coastwood felt unusually crisp and sharp, by far the most refreshing air I'd breathed in weeks. By the time I reached the car, my phone was flooded with missed calls and text messages. Without even glancing at them, I blocked Tam. Back at the house I'd bought before getting married, I packed only a few items, some clothes, my laptop, toiletries, and important documents. Tam had never shown me a single bit of warmth, so naturally there was nothing left for me to take as a memento. I found a budget-friendly hotel near the town and checked in. The surroundings didn't really matter. What mattered most was having a few moments of peace and quiet. After turning off my phone, I fell into a deep sleep, a first peaceful night's rest in months. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains, and to my surprise, I felt absolutely no fear at all. When I turned my phone back on, dozens of messages from Tam flooded in, mostly excuses, accusations, or pleas, all saying variations of "you're overreacting" or "I was just joking." I deleted them all and blocked him again. As his name disappeared from my screen, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. Once I'd calmed down, I reached out to Finlay O'Connor, a civil lawyer I'd known previously. He answered my call promptly, his voice calm and professional. I explained that my boyfriend, Tam, had publicly humiliated me several times, and last night had been the final straw. I wanted to draw a clear legal boundary between us. After confirming that I was fully committed, he went on to explain in detail the next steps, the documents I'd need, and the timeline ahead. My situation isn't complicated at all. There's no joint property, no shared accounts, and no children. The house is entirely in my name. He said he could submit the application that very day, and his assistant would get in touch with me to handle the paperwork. After hanging up, I was left with a mix of emotions, relief, yet also a heavy sense of foreboding. I'd expected Tam to react strongly, but I never imagined just how far he'd go. I'd thought walking out of the restaurant would be the hardest part, only to realize that was merely the beginning of this battle. The day after I'd submitted the documents, I'd assumed things would finally calm down. I figured Tam would sink into his usual overblown sulking, calling a few friends to complain about how unreasonable I'd been, and eventually, he'd just have to come to terms with reality. But once again, I'd underestimated him. Tam didn't back down. Instead, he chose to go to war. At first, it was exactly as I'd anticipated. A barrage of messages sent from new numbers and blocked numbers, emails from unfamiliar addresses, and an assortment of tones, angry, pleading, manipulative, apologetic, accusatory, all thrown at me like he was flinging darts into the dark, hoping that one of them might hit the version of me who used to give in so easily. I didn't reply to a single one of them. My silence utterly infuriated him. Then his family joined in. The first call came from his sister, Molly Callahan, a woman who'd always been cold toward me, as if she'd secretly suspected all along that I'd one day betray her brother by standing firm on my principles. She didn't even bother to say hello. Instead, she immediately fired off a question. "What's wrong with you, exactly? Tam is nearly falling apart, and you've humiliated him in front of everyone. At the very least, you owe him a chance to explain himself." Before she could finish speaking, I hung up. She called again, but I blocked her number. Then it was his mom's turn. Again, I blocked her too. After that, the girlfriend of one of his friends tried mediating. "Kiera, he's in a terrible state. Can't you just talk to him?" But I blocked her as well. With each call, I became even more convinced that my decision was the right one. But Tam wasn't about to give up just yet. After the guilt trip tactic failed, he stepped it up a notch. This new him was no longer playing small-time games. He'd become utterly strategic. All he wanted was control, any chance at all of forcibly getting back into my life. The first real warning sign came when my debit card was declined while I was filling up at a gas station. Standing there in front of the pump, I wore an expression of utter confusion. I knew full well that my account had more than enough funds. It wasn't until I called the bank that I finally understood why. Someone reported suspicious activity on your account and claimed that you're experiencing mental health issues, the customer service rep explained. "So, we've activated a fraud alert." My heart sank. "A woman?" "Yes, she provided your social security number and personal details, enough information for our system to initially approve her request. Only one person would do something like this, and only one person knows enough details about my life to make it sound so convincing." I spent nearly 3 hours at the bank branch, sitting at a small table under fluorescent lights, verifying information, canceling alerts, proving my identity, freezing account access, and adding new security measures. I wasn't angry. I was just stunned. Suddenly, I became acutely aware that as long as he had control over me, Tam could effortlessly pretend to be concerned about my mental health. After leaving the bank, the first person I called was my lawyer, Finley O'Connor. He's impersonating you. His voice immediately turned alert. Make a full record of everything. Send me the bank manager's statement. This is already harassment. I thought this was the worst thing that could happen, but it turned out to be far from it. 2 days later, I went back to the house I'd purchased before getting married to pick up some clothes and office supplies, but when I tried to use the key, it wouldn't open the door. The lock had been changed by Tam. After I knocked on the door, Tam opened it and actually treated me like an intruder. You abandoned me. You have no right to come back here. This is my house. It has nothing to do with you. He even tried to argue that since we'd been living together, he had some sort of claim on it. Right then and there, I used a loudspeaker to call my lawyer and alerted the police. Within less than 15 minutes, the officers arrived. Just one question. Does the property deed list your name? Left Tam speechless. He had no choice but to obediently unlock the door. Once inside, I found my personal belongings, clothes, documents, and other items, haphazardly stuffed into garbage bags and strewn messily around the garage. Is this how you treat my stuff? He retorted, complaining instead that my departure had embarrassed him. The police immediately reprimanded him for his inappropriate behavior. With the police's help, I took photos as evidence and made a formal statement. As I was finishing up and preparing to leave, Tam suddenly stepped forward, begging for mercy. I bluntly called him out. You're not sorry. You're just desperate. He froze in place, while the police officer softly reassured me that I'd made the right decision. I nodded in agreement, afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd lose control. At first, I'd thought changing the locks and setting up a fraud alert would be his last resort, but Tam seemed utterly convinced that as long as he could throw my life into enough chaos, disrupt my daily routine, compromise my accounts, and invade every corner of my existence, I'd eventually reach out to him on my own, negotiate with him, and even come back to him. But the truth was quite the opposite. Something deep inside me had grown stronger. I no longer just wanted to leave a bad relationship. I was now fully prepared to face a battle I'd never anticipated, yet one that I now understood all too well. He wasn't trying to win me back. He was trying to punish me for leaving him, and this was only the beginning. After the police forced him to let me enter my own home, Tam's frantic behavior didn't subside at all. On the contrary, it seemed to push him deeper into an online and wounded paranoia. He's not used to facing consequences, not used to anyone saying no to him, especially me. The next morning, my lawyer called. Kiara, he's filed a response, objecting to the breakup and claiming that you abandoned him and subjected him to emotional abuse. I laughed, really laughed, because it was just so absurd. After he'd publicly called me useless in front of 8 people, I left him, and that somehow turned into emotional abuse on my part? He's also claiming that you were the one who changed the locks, my lawyer added. For a split second, I remained silent. I couldn't tell whether Tam genuinely believed his own lies, or simply thought everyone else was too stupid to spot his blatant contradictions. We've got the police report, my lawyer reminded me. He doesn't stand a chance. Even so, I still felt uneasy. Tam wasn't just petty. He'd completely rewritten the whole story in his mind and was forcing the entire world to accept his version. That's exactly how he is in this relationship. Whatever he happens to believe at the moment becomes the truth, no matter how illogical or unconvincing it may be. Now, this has actually become his legal strategy. To refute his accusations, my lawyer advised me to gather testimony from everyone who'd been at the dinner party. I worried they'd refuse, or even worse, take Tam's side. But the result was completely unexpected. Within an hour, all 3 couples replied to me, saying, "We all saw it. We think he went way too far. We've been uneasy about the way he talks to you for a long time, and whatever you need, we're all willing to sign affidavits to support you." One of the husbands even added a remark that made my heart sink. "We used to think the way he talked to you was just your normal dynamic, but we never realized it was one-sided bullying on his part." Their testimonies were straightforward, detailed, and utterly compelling. I forwarded the testimony to my lawyer, and on the other end of the phone, He almost sounded relieved as he said, "This evidence is incredibly strong." With this consistent pattern of behavior, any defense he might offer would simply fall apart. But Tam kept creating more chaos. A few days later, my gym membership was suddenly canceled. The day after that, my car insurance was also terminated. Then, I started receiving numerous emails confirming that someone had requested the closure of several of my online accounts, streaming platforms, even a delivery service I hardly ever used. Each company gave the same explanation: "Someone has impersonated you and contacted us." I spent hours restoring all those accounts, adding passwords, verification codes, extra authentication steps, and setting up alerts. It was exhausting, but what really wore me down wasn't the tedious process itself. It was what these actions revealed about him. His desperation wasn't driven by heartbreak. It stemmed from an insatiable need for control. Tam isn't grieving over the end of this relationship. He's furious that I'm no longer living in a world where he sets the rules. My lawyer took this very seriously. "Keep documenting everything," he said. "Every instance of impersonation, every service cancellation, every attempted fraud, these are all blatant forms of harassment." In these actions, I no longer see the Tam I once knew. Perhaps this is his true nature. He only feels safe when others are struggling. Throughout our relationship, I've been the buffer, the first to apologize, the one who soothes his ego, the one who tolerates his bad temper, the one who keeps adjusting my boundaries just to accommodate his insecurities. Without me smoothing out the rough edges of his life, he'd have completely lost control. The hearing on the temporary right of residence in the house proceeded as scheduled. I arrived early and felt slightly nervous. Tam was 10 minutes late and looked utterly dispirited, while his lawyer wore an expression of utter helplessness. The judge got straight to the point, confirming that the property had been purchased by me personally before the marriage. After reviewing the documents I submitted, showing that I had paid for the mortgage, utilities, and all other expenses, the judge gave his approval. Tam's lawyer argued that Tam had lived there for 2 years and made emotional contributions, but the judge immediately interrupted him, demanding evidence of financial contributions. The lawyer was instantly speechless. Suddenly, Tam burst into anger, accusing me of abandoning him. My lawyer promptly presented testimony from dinner party witnesses, proving that Tam had publicly humiliated me over a long period. The judge dismissed Tam's remark that comparing someone to useless furniture was merely a joke and went on to cite numerous instances of Tam impersonating me, changing locks, and discarding my belongings. In the end, the judge ruled that I had sole right to live in the house and ordered Tam to move out within 2 weeks. "Where am I supposed to stay?" Tam asked in panic, to which the judge replied coolly that this was simply not within the court's purview. Outside the courtroom, Tam's sister Molly stormed over to me, furious and demanding to know why I'd kicked him out. I calmly countered with a question: "Just exactly what has he ever done for me?" She was instantly speechless. Standing nearby, Tam glared at me with icy resentment in his eyes. It became immediately clear to me that he would never accept defeat quietly, and that he'd only escalate his behavior from here on out. These past 2 weeks were supposed to be the deadline for Tam to move out, yet he showed absolutely no sign of humility or self-reflection. Instead, he stepped up his efforts even further. The day after the trial, he filed for spousal support, claiming that he'd sacrificed his career to support me. My lawyer bluntly described his claim as absurd. Tam had never held a stable job, his only experience had been part-time retail work, and there was simply no legal basis for his request. Nevertheless, we're still going to defend ourselves in court, and we're confident we'll prevail. Though I'm exhausted, I'm following my lawyer's instructions and gathering evidence nonetheless. My documents clearly show that I've been solely responsible for all household expenses, while Tam has switched between 6 different part-time jobs over the past 5 years, each one lasting only a few hours at most. The so-called sacrifice for his career is nothing but nonsense. Meanwhile, Tam has been playing the victim on social media, posting messages that imply I'm a perpetrator and an economic manipulator, and even sharing photos portraying himself as a pitiful victim to elicit sympathy from old friends. Even more outrageous, he actually took photos inside my home, falsely claiming that he'd been kicked out of the house he helped build with his own hands, completely ignoring the fact that he hadn't paid a single penny toward it. I've chosen not to pay attention to this negative noise and refuse to let his twisted rhetoric affect me. Following my lawyer's advice, I haven't returned to the house for the past 2 weeks, remaining constantly vigilant against any potential retaliation from Tam. As expected, he once again pretended to be me and applied to cancel the homeowner's insurance. I promptly contacted the insurance company to stop him and informed them that both parties are currently involved in legal proceedings. This has only made me clearer about his true nature. His thirst for power far outweighs any genuine affection he might have had. A week before the eviction was scheduled, Tam became increasingly panicked. His posts shifted from playing the victim to shouting about justice and revenge, and he even began spreading distorted information to people who didn't know me at all, claiming that I'd financially ruined him. After I briefly clarified the truth, most people stopped responding, and some even apologized to me. On the day of the eviction, my lawyer and I waited across the street for the sheriff, feeling both terrified and relieved. As soon as Tam opened the door and saw the sheriff, his arrogance vanished completely. He still tried to argue that the house was his, but the sheriff presented the court order, refuting his claim and informing him that he had to vacate the premises within 2 hours. Tam angrily denounced it all as absurd, claiming that I had abandoned him and left him with nothing. The sheriff made it clear that he was only handling the property issue. Any civil disputes would be dealt with separately. Soon after, Tam's mother arrived in a borrowed moving truck, furiously accusing me of throwing him away like garbage. I calmly explained to her that the judge had issued the ruling based on Tam's own behavior, leaving her speechless. For the next 2 hours, Tam cried, threw tantrums, and put on a dramatic show, insisting that he was the victim. Following my lawyer's advice, I stayed in the car, watching as his belongings were haphazardly stuffed into boxes and carted away, filled with resentment. When they finally finished moving and the truck drove away, I stepped back into my house. The air smelled different, more open, yet also lighter, as if all the tension had simply vanished. I immediately changed the locks and then hired a security company to install cameras around the property. It wasn't that I was being paranoid. Rather, I knew all too well just how far Tam would go. 3 days later, I received a thick envelope from a representative of his new lawyer. Tam was now suing me, demanding retroactive spousal support, claiming that he'd sacrificed years of career advancement in order to prioritize my life, my home, and my needs. My lawyer shook his head. He's completely lost it. We'll fight the lawsuit, but you'd better be prepared. He's not done yet. And he was right. Tam's performance in court next will make all the previous farces seem utterly insignificant. His lawsuit seeking retroactive spousal support is like the final flicker of a dying flame, a last, desperate struggle by someone who has never learned how to live without control. At the start of the trial, even his own lawyer seemed utterly exhausted by him. My lawyer sat beside me, exuding a calm confidence, clearly aware of what the outcome would be. This courtroom was smaller than the last one, yet colder. Its white walls made every tiny sound reverberate. Tam sat alone at his desk, with no lawyer, no family, and no audience. Just a stack of trembling, handwritten motions and photocopies, and a pen he kept clicking back and forth, as if the sound of that clicking could somehow calm him down. When I walked into the courtroom, his gaze swept over me, not with shame or remorse, but with the awkwardness of a man whose self-esteem had been deeply wounded, unable to accept the fact that the world no longer revolved around him. After flipping through the documents, the judge calmly asked questions, challenging Tam's claim for spousal support. He asserted that he'd sacrificed my career to support you, yet couldn't produce any proof of steady employment. Tam argued that he'd done part-time retail work in the past, but avoided mentioning the fact that he'd switched jobs 6 times in 5 years, working only minimal hours each time. After reviewing the employment records we'd submitted, the judge pressed him further about the frequent job changes. Tam stammered and mumbled, saying he'd given up on my ambitions for the sake of my family. The judge immediately shot back, pointing out that I was solely responsible for all household expenses and asking him directly, Exactly what sacrifices did you make? Tam was instantly speechless. My lawyer promptly presented additional evidence, not only proving that I'd been bearing the financial burden entirely on my own, but also submitting documents detailing Tam's harassment, his attempts to impersonate me, and his illegal lock-changing activities. The judge acknowledged that the evidence was sufficient and compelling. Faced with questioning, Tam suddenly flew into a rage, roaring that I'm being targeted and I've ruined his life. He even slandered me, accusing me of having money and influence and buying off others. After the judge's stern warning proved ineffective, he signaled to the court bailiffs to escort him out, but Tam kept muttering defensively, insisting he was in the right. In the end, the case was dismissed in less than 2 minutes. The lawyer breathed a sigh of relief and said he'd now draft the final documents. This farcical episode was about to come to an end. He was right. This legal storm, which had consumed months of my time, didn't end with a bang after all. It ended instead with Tam's final breakdown in the courthouse hallway. In the weeks that followed, life became strangely calm, so calm, in fact, that it felt almost foreign to me. I'd finally returned completely to my home, not cautiously tiptoeing in anymore, no longer preparing myself for potential damage, but truly coming home. I so desperately needed this kind of peace. Every night, I'd repaint the walls, rearrange the room, and replace furniture that had never really felt like mine. It wasn't about erasing Tam's presence. It was about reclaiming something I'd been slowly losing without even realizing it. I packed up what little was left of him, old photographs, the shirts he'd left behind, a few books, and set them out on his mother's doorstep, without knocking. I didn't want any more arguments, didn't want to hear his shouts or accusations, or yet another guilt trip about how I'd abandoned him. What I wanted was release, a peaceful release, the calmest way I could give myself. For so long, my life had been confined within the narrow corridor of Tam's moods. But when I stepped out of that corridor, I realized just how vast and bright the world really is, and even my breathing felt lighter. Work started to go more smoothly, my focus sharpened, and my boss noticed it too. 2 months after the trial finally wrapped up, I was promoted to a management position, a role I'd been quietly hoping for all along but had never dared to pursue amid Tam's chaos. Gradually, I began to consider something I'd thought I'd never want again: emotional connection. His name is Elias Peterson. Our encounter couldn't have been more ordinary. Standing in a small independent bookstore, we both reached for the same book on the shelf at the same time. We laughed, exchanged stories about our favorite authors, and the following week, we met again for coffee. There were no grand romantic gestures, no intense passion, just comfort and ease. He'd listened to me carefully, without interrupting, belittling, or dominating the conversation. He'd ask questions and remember the details I shared. The first time he asked me about my past relationship, I gave him a brief version. He shook his head slowly and said, "He really sounds like someone who'd be exhausting to be around." He was, I replied. It took me months to realize just how much injustice I'd been putting up with. He didn't press further. He just said, "I'm glad you're no longer with him now." I laughed, a laugh I hadn't felt so sincere in ages. Let's take it slow. I'm not rushing into another serious relationship, nor am I trying to fill some inner void. I'm simply learning what it feels like to be truly respected, the kind of basic respect that I'd once mistakenly thought of as a luxury. As for Tam, I'd occasionally hear from mutual acquaintances. He'd moved in with his mom and found a full-time job as a waiter, a job that was his first full-time position in years. He's still complaining, still telling others that I took everything away from him, and still portraying himself as a victim of an immense injustice. But this time, fewer and fewer people believe him. Our mutual friends have started to distance themselves from him, and one friend finally couldn't hold back any longer. He confronted him directly and told him the truth. He hadn't lost anything at all. I didn't know him a thing, and before I left, he'd already been cruel for far too long. Tam burst into tears, claiming that everyone was out to get him. But some things had changed. No one believed his lies anymore. And now this was no longer my problem. It was no longer a guilt I had to carry, No longer an emotion I needed to soothe, no longer a mess I had to fix. Several months later, I drove past Tuscany Winery, the very restaurant where it had all begun to fall apart. I had expected to feel bitterness or sadness, maybe even a lingering sense of old humiliation, but that moment passed, and my heart was utterly undisturbed. It was just a building, a place, a spot where I'd decided not to accept the self Tam had imposed on me. That night, sitting in my car outside my own home, I looked at the fresh paint on the walls, the new furniture, the brand new lock, and felt a deep inner peace. For the first time in nearly 40 years, I finally understood something. Leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the very beginning of the first chapter I'd ever written for myself. And choosing myself was the bravest thing I've ever done.